As we have two incredible uh, leaders talking about what does it take to see high ambient AI adoption in complex settings. This is a conversation that features Dr. Ben Condon, a medical doctor serving as a clinical content editor and GTM go-to-market clinical specialist at Heidi Health, where he applies his surgical and critical care expertise to shape the company's global clinical strategies and content. Prior to joining Heidi in March of 2025, he spent 6 years practicing as a surgical and critical care physician in Australia, transitioning into medtech to drive greater impact through scalable healthcare solutions. Joining him is Dr. Stephanie Lahr, a seasoned physician executive turned and long day physician executive and founder of Vital Thread Advisory, where she leverages her experience as a CMIO, CIO, and AI healthcare leader to help organizations navigate digital transformation. She previously served as CMIO and CIO at Monument Health, where she led enterprise-wide EHR unification and clinical innovation, and is recognized for bridging clinical insight with technology to drive meaningful change. I'm going to turn it over to you two to close us out today for your conversation.
Thank you so much, Carol. It's really an honor to be able to be here today, and I'm very excited for this doctor-to-doctor conversation in a space where we are both clinicians, but now both really with a heavy focus on how to help industry advance where clinicians can go with technology. And so, again, really excited to be here today and taking on the pressure of closing out what has been a really amazing couple of sessions throughout the morning that I was happy to be able to participate in periodically. I'm going to give Ben a minute to introduce himself a little bit further, and then we're going to jump right into this conversation around the adoption of ambient AI technologies in care delivery. Ben.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Stephanie. Great to be here and good evening, everyone. Introduction was pretty comprehensive, so I'll keep it brief. But I'm an emergency doctor or registrar, and took a sabbatical from training to venture into the world of health tech, and haven't looked back after 3 years. And yeah, part of my role at Heidi is really trying to understand what makes AI adoption tick, and then how to kind of communicate and explain that to everyone. So really looking forward to this discussion and hopefully be able to share what we're seeing in the market, but also what we think is going to drive, hopefully making our lives a lot easier when it comes to showing up every day to work on the shop floor and when we're looking after our patients.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I think is so fantastic about all the conversations today, and certainly the one that we are going to have, when I look back on my career, in the early parts of my career as a CMIO, I joke, but sort of truly and honestly, I felt like the billboard I could put out was, I can make it suck less. And
Yeah.
that was like the most I could really say without vastly overpromising and under-delivering. And we are in an era of healthcare technology advancement at this point where that is not the case anymore. The foundational technologies are in place, and now we can really look at new advancements, a lot of which are obviously leveraging AI, and then getting into, what is beyond, and how to bring those in a way that supports workflow and things like that. So talk to me a little bit about, kind of coming into this space from the clinical side and what was important to you as you evaluated these technologies, particularly ambient AI technologies for healthcare providers, knowing that the goal was to do a lot more than make it suck less.
Yeah. I mean, that certainly resonates. And I think that's the exciting opportunity with AI is that we now have the opportunity to make a real stepwise change in terms of changing the experience of not just clinicians, but also patients in a really meaningful way. I think I think the key here though is recognizing that particularly with AI solutions, we're not just changing a workflow and how it looks. We're not moving from paper to keyboard, for instance, with a digitized medical record. We're actually asking the AI to replace elements of the clinician's work that might be in the generating of a note or down the line looking up evidence and things like that. So when you're asking a software to replace a clinician or at least remove a clinician from part of that process, the stakes are a lot higher. And I think what we're, seeing at the moment is there's a lot of recognition of the opportunity in terms of the hype is real, and I think everyone sees the raw potential in the technology. But we're also seeing probably a lukewarm impact on the ground in terms of, 62% of scribe vendors are looking to change scribes within the next 2 years. We're seeing poor adoption rates around 20 to 40%. And I guess we think this is more of a strategy miss rather than a technology miss. And we're really bullish on that. We think if we focus really deeply on the individual clinician and building a product that works for them and can keep up with them, importantly, not adding steps, but removing steps from their workflow and doing that in a consistent and reliable way, then you start to see, really exciting adoption rates, and you start to see that enthusiasm and that hope for something that's really meaningful in terms of transformational change come to fruition when you've got lots of people in your organization consistently using a product.
Yeah, and I think, we heard it in just the session before us as well, talking about the technology is the technology. It's great. But the
Yeah.
implementation, the change management, the delivery, and the specificity even of what needs to happen, and understanding that an emergency room situation and needs of an emergency room physician are vastly different from a surgeon in the OR, which is also different from a provider who is doing clinic visits versus inpatient care. And so, I'd like for you to maybe dig in a little more deeply
Yeah.
when you talk about the nuances that have resulted in some of the adoption challenges that we've encountered in
Mhm.
this space. Because again, people were very excited. In my old life, when I showed up at the door and said, "Hey, I have a tool that could keep you from not having to do documentation, for having to do your documentation," almost everyone
Yeah.
said, "Yes, please," right? No one said, "Please, I want to keep doing this."
Yeah.
But it didn't always fit just right, and some of that, it really is on this adoption side. So talk about that some
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, of course. So I think recognizing that whilst the work is similar across specialties and environments, there are, like you said, there are some significant environmental factors even just to making a scribe work. So if you've got a scribe that's tied to a computer and doesn't have a mobile app, or doesn't handle well in a busy emergency department where you've got a screaming child in the cubicle next door and you might have 3 or 4 people in a cubicle, or multiple clinicians talking at once to try and coordinate care in a resus situation, that level of execution and the need to kind of be able to what we kind of say keep up in that situation is just so much higher, and you really need to stress test products to make sure that they're able to do that. And in the same way that if you're going into home care as a solo clinician, like we were talking about in the last session, you need to be able to still have all of the versatility and functionality in your phone. The scribe is no good to you wedded in your office back in the hospital, because you've lost all of that benefit. And equally, you've got to figure out a way that it's not intruding on that consultation, especially if it's distracting a patient or if it's requiring your constant attention. All of that, the benefits of being able to look your patient in the eye and actually just have a distraction-free consultation with them and conversation with them about their health evaporates really quickly when you're kind of focusing, is the scribe working, is the microphone on, and all of these types of things. So even just the way it where how it's designed to not intrude visually and on the conversation is really, really important. And then when this doesn't quite come together really nicely, I guess, is people will try it and people's enthusiasm has definitely been there. But we see people then choosing to use it maybe a couple of times a day rather than for every patient. We see people only opting to use it when the conditions are perfect. And I think that's the miss. We don't live in a perfect world, and the and the hospital environment is one of the most challenging environments to work in terms of you can't predict where you're going to be 5 minutes ahead of where you're going to be oftentimes. So how do we make it so that it's easier for you to use the technology? And I think in having that technology in your pocket that's It can transfer between phone to laptop seamlessly, and things like that really start to become important in that clinical environment where you've got a lot going on at the best of times, and you need to be able to actually truly focus on the patient rather than splitting your attention still between Scribe or any AI software, and what you're trying to do clinically.
Yeah, and that adoption, like as you mentioned, you get sort of a couple of swings at the bat when you're working with clinicians to adopt new technologies, because in the busy work that they're doing, they want to try new things. And certainly, I find clinicians in the current era to be very tech savvy and desiring, but the expectation is that it works as well as for the things that happen in their day-to-day life, right? And so maybe the other thing that I think is a sort of parallel to the every other thing in our life is there are choices, right? There's a lot of noise and activity in this space right now. The
Yeah.
tools themselves with AI and open source platforms, it's very easy to come to the table and say, I can do this too. Even health systems that are even considering, maybe I don't need a vendor for this at all. Maybe we can have our own teams build out these technologies and not go to the expense of an outsourced vendor. Talk
Yeah.
about your experience, sort of how health systems should be thinking about this and the differentiators to help them navigate making the right decision in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I really feel for health vendors because it's particularly overwhelming, and there's seemingly another option to choose from every week. But I think what we've found to be really, really helpful is reframing the way you're thinking about AI procurement. And I think to take a step back, if you're a hospital or healthcare organization, up until before AI, if a software wasn't integrated, it was really not a viable option. And that integration piece answered a lot of concerns about interoperability, security, and the like. So we've seen a lot of health systems come to this AI adoption and AI rollout with that integration first mentality, which makes sense given the context of software procurement the last 30 plus years. But with AI, you don't have to be welded to a medical record to have a software that will work and can keep up and can deliver on the process. And our approach at Heidi is really to be focused like intensely on the clinician user and build an amazing product that will work in any healthcare setting and is like in many ways out of the box. You can download it in minutes and start using it in your practice. And focusing in on personalization and understanding what drives those high adoption rates. And that way, you then have a product that you can have conviction that your clinicians are going to use. And as we integrate as a second step rather than a first step, we have better visibility on actually how the product's been used in the wild, in the hospital, what our clinicians are actually looking for, and where the real kind of gold nuggets of that integration will lie. That if we just led with an integration and we miss those opportunities for kind of refinement, we see it very much as the start of an AI kind of journey. You go on a journey with us as your AI care partner, with scribes being that first kind of feature beachhead, if you will. And we'll build you those products and those features that your clinicians will love and they will rave about and they will talk about it in the tea room, and we will impress them with their ability to keep up. And then what that does over the course and that focus on the individual clinician user will help solve for that adoption gap. And what we're seeing to kind of frame that adoption gap is we're seeing adoption of 60 to 80% in trials when we roll out in US health hospitals, whereas the industry kind of benchmark is 25 to 40%. Now, the thing that we get excited about when we talk about adoption and we see adoption rates that high is that we start to get into that realm of where we actually realize that transformational change. We recognize the technology is new. We recognize there is an appropriate degree of caution from clinical users. So we're not going to get everyone, in the first kind of 6 months. But what we're able to do by getting adoption to that, high 60s up to 80% early is demonstrate that actually this is a product that works. This is a product that lives up to what we say it can do on the packet. And then this then gives you the opportunity as an organization to see all of those efficiency gains and start to actually see that transformation that you've been promised, rather than kind of scratching your head and thinking, well, we've got this beautiful integrated product, but no one's using it. And that can be that's a really challenging flip, I think, for organizations trying to understand what's gone wrong. Because I think if you don't have that personalization lens and you don't have that perspective where you're really trying to solve for a beautiful experience for a clinician in the hospital wards or in theater suites, um, it's very difficult to explain why you don't have a higher adoption. Because, like you say, it's like, hold on, we're saving you time on notes. That like, why isn't this working? And I think, you know, if I've reflected on this a lot, and I think the thing that about your notes is, they're a reflection of you. They're not just there for your medical legal protection, and it's not part of it is a core part of your professional responsibilities. But I take pride in how my note looks and feels like my own, and how my colleagues will then judge me as a clinician on my note and my clinical rationale and decision making. So I think if you have a cookie cutter note that doesn't allow for that personalized output, that doesn't allow you to inject your kind of personal structure on this is how I like to document, people then turn away from it. Because if you've got this generic note that feels and looks like it's AI generated, and it's probably 60 to 80% of the note that you would have written, it doesn't feel good enough to replace the work that you would have done, if that makes sense. It needs to feel like it's yours, and it needs to feel like it reflects that, you as a clinician. Because um, it's such an important part of the work that we do. And I think clinicians rightly have a really high bar for what they're going to accept in terms of this is, yeah, I'm happy with this output, I'm happy with this kind of note makeup. And I think that's really been the secret sauce for us, is just unlocking that personalization for that individual user to let them feel like it's their own, I guess. And then across an organization, you then get the opportunity to see and realize the benefits of broader uptake and adoption of those tools.
Yeah, and digging in a little bit further on that adoption and the 60 to 80%, I there are differences, as you've mentioned, in specialties, and some of the what we would consider sort of the higher, the more cognitive specialties, where there's, you are trying to get across the thinking that went in to what decisions you're making. There's no exact right answer. Medicine remains an art and always will. And so you're trying to not only help describe where you are and what's happening with the patient, but for your own self and for colleagues down the road, if you need to go back and think about it a different way, what was the rationale at the beginning and later? And do you think then, because the ambient scribe scenario, it is really not that, it's not new. It's been an evolving thing for a while. And for the first several years, the adoption really was in some of the specialties that were much more structured and regimented. They were doing quick post-operative notes. They were doing clinic notes that were very structured and based on one particular problem and one particular reason for a visit. And I know in my experience, what we saw was primary care on inpatient and outpatient side sort of continued to feel a little sidelined because it didn't fit into that box. And so
Yeah,
I think when you can talk about 60 and 80% adoption rates that are inclusive of primary care specialization, where one visit might have three different topics and a lot of critical clinical decision-making elements that need to go in, where you want that personality to come through, it's actually even greater than saying 60 to 80%, right? It's sort of an exponential lift
absolutely.
because the kind of note that you're writing is a different kind of note.
Absolutely. And that's why we're really proud of the product, because it's able to cope with those, multi-issue primary care visits where you're asking lots of questions and covering a lot of ground, and under a lot of time pressure. But it can also, sustain and work really beautifully in an hour-long mental health consultation or psychiatric visit, right through to and handle those family meetings with end-of-life discussions, and a lot of real nuance and care taken in those consultations. And um, I think that's really where people can underestimate the tech. Like, this is not a case of just a literal transcription of conversation. as clinicians, we know like we can be asking a line of questioning and we can actually be looking for an answer that's non-verbal, or we're actually looking if the pain is distractible. And there's a lot of nuance into to the art of how we actually ask questions within a consultation. And what we've done with Heidi is we understand that there's more to the questions that you're asking than just the literal answer that you might be asking, and building a model that can appreciate lines of questioning, can and can then synthesize those lines of questioning within reasonable limits so that you can see that, oh, actually it was right, I was trying to assess for pain as well as rule out all of these other things in the meantime. Or recognizing that someone might say that they're breathless, but if they're talking fluently full sentences, they might potentially only have subjective breathlessness rather than objective breathlessness and the like. And I think there's subtle differences in a consultation, but they make a huge difference when you then come to review the output. And in terms of building trust in the tool as well, I think it's really exciting to kind of see that come to life. And I think that again is a big reason, as you said, for that amazing adoption rate.
Yeah, and I think the beginning of the incorporation of AI into clinician workflow is in some of these, technologies that are supporting administrative work burden and, allowing clinicians to work differently with technology. It certainly, though, begs the question of if it's capable of this, what else is it capable of in the future? And then there's two elements to that. And so one is, I'm looking at the question in the Q&A, asking
Yeah.
what skills or training should today's clinicians acquire to work effectively with AI tools? And I'm assuming they mean that in the broadest context, not just in an AI tool that creates the note, but when thinking about all of the potentials for artificial intelligence and moving into agentic AI and even, world model and robotics down the line, how do we incorporate what clinicians need to know in order to evaluate those tools for themselves? It's pretty easy to assess whether you like the output of your note or not, and whether
Yeah.
it's accurate. But as we get further down this path, this is, a learning for everyone. And so would love your comments
Yeah.
just as you're thinking about that more
Yeah.
broadly.
Absolutely. I think the way I kind of frame this is first, like, what are the table stakes to enter and assessing a tool is, and that's, we start with privacy and security, and does, the tools that you're using meet all of the really common sense kind of requirements to play in healthcare. So data storage, where is it stored? Is it stored securely on private servers? Those types of things. Really easy way to do that is look for HIPAA compliance, ISO 27001, etc. There are some really easy ways to kind of check that, but I think they're really important to just feel confident that you're not going to compromise patient data or anything like that using a tool. Beyond that, then increasingly what I think is going to be important in AI tools, and probably beyond Scribe, what we're talking about is, because you can probably skip this step for the time being, but if you're getting the AI tool to do a calculation, to do some research, it can't be a black box. We need to be able to see and show the work. And we talk about not model math, like real math. If you're using it to calculate creatinine clearance, like, it can't be model math. It has to be real math, and it has to be real math consistently. So looking for tools that are prepared to show their work and provide you where and how they got those answers when we kind of think to like the next step in terms of maybe clinical decision support and things like that. And then I think the final tool is actually just using your clinical intuition. And I think that's like when you talk about, using your intuition to assess a note. One of the things we say a lot to hospitals when we talk to us is don't trust us. We're the vendor. We're really bullish on our product. You should trust your doctors and trust your clinicians to make the final assessment on a tool and whether it's up to the standard of that you're comfortable with. And you should stress test a product in your practice. And what that looks like in reality is, it's just being prepared to give things a go. And I think, actually taking that kind of almost that play and that experimentation attitude to these tools. Some will disappoint you, and some will surprise you, and there'll be a few, there'll be many in the middle that'll be a bit lukewarm. But I think actually try, with that framing of, is this safe? Can I understand how it works? Does it work reliably where I need it to do? And I think you'll know intuitively pretty well at the end of that if this tool is for you or not. And you'll also be able to get some really good feedback if the tool's not there, why is it not there? And I think the beauty of AI is it's not like other software that we have to learn and kind of we've got to mold to it. It really should be molding to us. So we're really should be in the box seat in terms of making that final decision on like, is this actually where it needs to be for me to have full confidence and trust to use it in my practice. And I think if you can tick those three boxes, that to me is a really good tool. And yeah, it's incredibly exciting to think of all of the different potential tools out there. But I think that would be how I would frame it as simply as that.
Yeah, and maybe, I just think of when I talk with clinicians about who are excited but a little reticent on the concept of AI and how to bring it into workflow. Some of it is, again, they're learning about it and they're looking for the resources. One of the things I think is really important is just like we, use technology in other spaces of our life that we did, for documentation and other purposes, leveraging AI outside of your day job, right? When you're planning your next vacation, use ChatGPT to do some research and make some recommendations. Ask it to, synthesize things that you know the absolute answer to, so that you can gain some experience in how hallucinations happen. And, I was having it create an infographic for me. And even though all of the information was right there, it completely made some stuff up to put in this
Yeah,
infographic. And so, understanding and using some of these technologies in the space outside of healthcare where we know the stakes are higher
yeah.
can help you learn and become a little more fluent and a little more comfortable with, these tools aren't perfect, and whatever it's being trained on, whatever that data set is, I need to understand that and where it came from. I think is an important thing for just as humans that we think about integrating AI into our lives, let alone as clinicians.
Ask questions. Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree. And as you were talking there, the other thing that came to mind was actually just maybe reframing what what um what like hallucinations look like and the impact that has. Because reasonably, people see a hallucination, and every AI product will have a hallucination. Like there's no backing away from that. You think, what's going on here? How could I ever trust this thing again? And then in becoming a bit more comfortable with AI, how they work. Um, and being a little bit more forgiving, but also recognizing that this is why it's so important that you as the clinician are still in the loop. And the value proposition for scribes, for example, is not the perfect note 100% of the time that you would write. The value proposition is we're going to save you 85% of your documentation time, and that you're going to then review that note in seconds to a minute or so rather than running around trying to complete that note after hours. And there is occasionally going to be errors, and there's occasionally going to be things like an intern or a junior doctor might make errors transcribing a note too, right?
Right.
And whilst we might laugh sometimes at the intern and they completely miss the point of a conversation or that make a funny spelling mistake, in the same way with hallucinations, if you can frame it as this, okay, this is obviously why I'm in the driver's seat, and this is why there are appropriate kind of checks and balances here. But the gain is still really positive, and I think rightly so. People are like, if there's a hallucination, this isn't up to standard. But I think if we reframe that in the age of AI, and we start to kind of just get more comfortable with why they're there and how models work, and we start to understand and get a little more comfortable that we can still trust a product even if it hallucinates, albeit rarely. That I think is really important as well. So it doesn't erode confidence when you see things like that as well.
Yeah, and it drives home the requirement that we remain intellectually engaged. This is not a way to sort of just let the work get done, more easily. And
Yeah,
I actually, think we might even we'll see the improvements the most when there is that synergy between the clinician and the tool. And, just like
absolutely.
we've seen, even when it was playing chess, the reality was the human and the computer were better together than either of them were apart. And that really, as we finish up in this last couple of minutes and you think about, this era that we're in again of ambient AI and generative AI, moving into rapidly into agentic and then into worldview of robotics and, kind of what's possible. What do you think that looks like, and what do you see as where this is going and what that path is, for clinicians in particular who
Yeah.
have more complex patients, more disease processes to manage and care for, and more tools to be able to care for those patients in a growing complexity of medical care delivery?
Yeah. Big question, but I think what the way we try and think of it is there should be no need for a clinician to touch a keyboard ever in their practice. Like our idea of an AI care partner is you walk into a room, you're entirely present on with your patient. The AI care partner knows what room you're in, it knows what patient you're seeing. It's looking at the obs on the machine. It's like detecting that they're tachycardic and hypotensive without you needing to say it. It's knowing that they're day one post-op and they're already pulling up, filling out a form to run some bloods and do like that and do things like that, where every minute of your day that's spent charting something, the AI is anticipating that and presenting you with a go, no go, like review this, I'm ready to go. Rather than looking up a guideline, the guideline will be presented to you in a way that's like really, really easy and convenient, and you can just be there and focus on the patient in front of you and making really critical clinical decisions. And we don't foresee a time where the AI is not, there might be, some specific tasks where, you might let the AI page a colleague, or like, Heidi might make a call to a colleague to say you need to review this patient, but the AI is going to have strict kind of safety guardrails. So you're always going to be in control and you're always going to know what it's doing. But we hope that by removing a lot of that friction in your day and removing a lot of the necessary grunt work to kind of getting an answer, or even just the amount of forms that you might need to fill out to get access to a medication and things like that, they're all opportunities for us to deploy AI in a way that hopefully makes your practice easier and more enjoyable, and allows you to just focus on the thing that I think we all enjoy most, which is talking to our patients and making clinical decisions, or at least trying to figure out what we need to make those decisions as quickly as we can. So yeah, we're really excited on what that looks like, and I think we're really excited to kind of start to venture beyond Scribe to explore how we get there. And yeah, we're really, really excited about that. And we hope everyone here today is excited by their work being a little bit more enjoyable and a little bit free of that kind of grunt work that can really wear us down over time.
Yeah, I was looking for my emoji response icons on the bottom so that I could be clapping and cheering while you were talking, because that really is, the goal is let's bring the joy back to the practice of medicine globally for everyone involved, and reducing the friction, by leveraging technologies is one of the absolute ways that we're going to get there. So it's been
Yeah.
a pleasure. It's gone by so quickly, but really been a lovely conversation. Thanks so much for taking the time, and thanks everyone for participating.
Great.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, everyone.